حكيم الله يا سلام. O restorer of wholeness and giver of peace. Ya Salam. Ya Hayy. O you who are the source of all life and the giver of life, including the knowledge that restores us to life. Ya Hayy. Ya Razzaq. Ya Wahhab. O you who are the one who gives us sustenance and provision, and you, the giver of such great bounty without limitation. Ya Razzaq. Ya Wahhab. Ya O you who are the light of the heavens and the earth. Ya Nur. In Alhamdulillah, we say that all praise and all thanksgiving belongs to God, because God is all of these beautiful things and so much more. Because our very existence here is contingent upon God's existence. God has given us these rented houses, these bodies, so that we may live and learn and come to know one another and come to know the truth of our existence, the truth of revelation, the truth of where we came from, the truth of where we're going, the truth of the fact that we were created for bliss, for flourishing, and the truth of the vehicles, the ways that have been given to us to rediscover that. And especially in this blessed month, the month of God's free giving to us, the month that we celebrate the gift of revelation and the gift of knowledge and the gift of speech and community, the gift of everything. It is right to give God thanks and praise. And as we celebrate God's forgiveness, God's habitual and constant willingness to forgive and to restore and to reconcile, we want to take a moment to think of anyone in our own hearts or our own lives that we have not been able to forgive. Because we do not want to carry them beyond this sacred month of Ramadan. It is not for us to absolve anyone of cruel, harmful, criminal behavior. But in this month, when we realize and remember that we are on a journey and that our lives are more than just our stories, but that these are spiritual narratives. These are stories of a spiritual journey. We have to decide what we want to carry with us and what we now need to leave behind. And so as we celebrate and seek God's forgiveness, we must also be ready dispensers of that grace. And as we seek for God's mercy, we also must be willing to be conduits of God's mercy to everyone and to everything. As we celebrate the liberation that Revelation brings, we must also commit ourselves again to become the liberators of not only ourselves, but of everyone in our life. And the liberators of people that whom we may never meet, and yet souls who are affected by our lives in one way or another. And so we begin by praising God and seeking God's forgiveness. We ask God to forgive us all that we have done that has harmed ourselves or the creation or any other soul or impaired anyone or anything in any way. We ask God to remove from us the behaviors which are harming ourselves and others. We ask for God to bless those whom we have hurt and to make their wounds luminous and beautiful and filled with grace and wisdom. And we ask God to forgive us for all of those righteous things that we should have done and yet failed to do. Those beautiful deeds which were left undone because we turned away, we were distracted, we were more concerned with ourselves, or simply that we didn't feel like being a source of love and compassion in a particular moment. We ask for God to forgive us all of the harmful tendencies which really do exist within our hearts. We ask for God to fill those dark places with light and with a desire to love and to restore and to heal. We ask God to forgive us any destructive implications of our deeds, whether we intended harm or not. And we ask God to guide this time that we have today together. We ask for God's blessings and peace and salutations to be forever upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad al-Mustafa, God's chosen and God's beloved. The one who is sent as Khatam al-Nabiyyin, sent to affirm and confirm, to verify, to clarify what all the prophets before him brought and taught. The one who was sent as nothing but a token of God's love to everyone and to everything. We ask for God's blessings and peace to be upon him. We ask for God's blessings and peace to be upon his beloved family members who sacrificed everything for the sake of this faith and for the sake of justice and for the sake of being faithful to God's call, even when it was not popular, even when it was not going to help them or profit them in any way, even when it was going to cost them everything, including their own lives and their own freedom. We ask for God's blessings to be upon his beloved and purified family members. We ask for God's blessing to be upon all of his righteous and true companions who similarly gave up everything so that they could serve this cause. And who have, in the course of generations, brought this tradition to us and entrusted it to us. We ask for God's blessings to be upon them. We ask for God's blessings to be upon all of the messengers, all of those prophets and messengers, those whose names we know and those whose names we do not know. We ask for God's blessings to be upon their families. We ask for God's blessings and peace to be upon all of their righteous and true companions. We ask for God's blessings and peace to be upon their communities, even as we ask for God's peace to be upon and blessing to be upon our own community. We ask for God's blessings and peace to be upon the indigenous peoples of this land, those luminous souls who were so viciously betrayed and stripped of their sovereignty, and yet who continue to practice a kind of spiritual and ethical sovereignty, reminding us that this creation is a sacred trust, and that we were placed here not to be the exploiters or takers, but rather to be the caretakers and caregivers, the khulafa of this creation. We ask for God's blessings to be upon them, and we ask that the words and ideas and transformative content that we share today, we ask that this will inspire and awaken in us a desire to walk with them, to walk upon the earth, knowing that we are walking upon a sacred trust, and to interact with the creation in the same way that we interact with those relics of sacredness that are entrusted to us, such as the blessed ayat, the luminous ayat of the Quran itself. And so we seek God's forgiveness and we ask for God's blessings upon all of these and more. Wabak. Beloveds, I once again am here not as a dispenser of knowledge or wisdom, but really as a fellow seeker. And I've said that many times, and I say it very sincerely, that the words that we're sharing today are not words or ideas of my creation or cleverness. These are wise and spiritually infused teachings that come down to us from the Quran, from the Messenger ﷺ, from the luminous members of his family. May God's blessings be upon them. And from these wise and spiritually awakened sages of our tradition. May God's blessings be upon all of them. And we are all in the trenches trying to figure out how we can understand, internalize, and operationalize these teachings. And I am very much in that category. But as we begin, I just want to thank you for being here on these Friday afternoons during Ramadan, these afternoons when I know that you could be somewhere else. But these afternoons are afternoons where, because of our gathering, you are encouraging me to remember. You are encouraging me to walk with these teachings. You are encouraging me to internalize and manifest these teachings in a more faithful way. And so I really need to thank you for being here. The great sage and poet and mystic Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, in one of his poems, said that sometimes we don't come to know someone by what they say to us. Sometimes we come to know people by the words that they inspire in our own hearts when we're in their presence. And so if anything good and luminous and life-giving has come in these afternoons that we have spent together, please don't mistake these words as being mine. But these words are very much the product of the luminosity of our gathering. And because of the sincerity of our seeking as a community. Certainly, if anything has been misspoken or spoken badly, or points have been made that are in any way life-taking instead of life-giving, or disaffirming instead of affirming, those are what I keep for myself. Those are what I must claim responsibility for. But whatever that has emerged in these gatherings that is luminous and life-giving, please let us attribute that to its proper source, which is God, and also attribute to the beautiful sincerity of our gathering and our seeking. We began by talking about transformation. And what a transformation, which is not just a momentary realization that passes in the same way that the hunger in our stomachs pass when we become satiated at the end of the day or at the end of the month. But a transformation that really is permanent, ground that we claim that will not be given back. How can we even begin thinking about that kind of transformation? Not something which makes us feel good in the moment, but something which makes us be better, both in this moment and in the moments that follow. And so we began by the need to rethink religion itself, not as something that we do for God, but as something that God does and is doing for us. And we remembered in this first discussion another statement by Jalaluddin Rumi, that God is not the one who is glorified in worship, it is the worshiper that is glorified in the act of worship. And when we begin to think about religion as something that God is doing for us, it begins to make sense when we think about this mythic place that we currently inhabit, this world between the gardens. Affirming this religious Abrahamic idea, scriptural idea, that we began in a garden. We began in a state of wholeness, and we began in a state that was in harmony with God, in harmony with one another, our fellow human beings. We began in a state that was in harmony with the creation. A world, a state without religion, a world without hierarchy, a world without sovereignty except for God's sovereignty, a world without socioeconomic differences, a world without all of these things that are used to delegitimate, to subjugate, to persecute others. So we have this image of beginning in a state of bliss. A state when the human form was so amazing, both internally and externally, secretly and in a way that is manifest to the entirety of the creation, that even the angels were commanded to bow down before the form of Adam alayhi salam. Not because of his maleness, but because he was the embodiment of the human form that is our inheritance. And so we believe in that garden, the existence of that state, even though it is so far away from us now. It is not the world we woke up in this morning. And that human form is not the form that I took when I opened my eyes this morning. But we are so far from that, it's a kind of mythic dream for us. An instructive dream, and yet a kind of mythic dream. And in spite of all of our attempts in the 1960s and 1970s to get back to the garden, and in spite of Van Morrison's album, No Guru, No Method, No Teacher, Just You and I in the garden, right? This idea that somehow we can get back to the garden. We know that there's no going back. That's right, sister. There is no going back to that garden, and yet we are given a spiritual vision of another garden, which represents all of that same rightness. The restoration of our human form, the restoration of our relationships with one another, which today might be very rocky and very difficult. The restoration of our relationship with God, who is constantly calling us to the bliss of that right relationship. But that's, again, not where we woke up this morning. And so here we are in this valley between the gardens, this vale of tears, this world of alienation, this world of fragmentation, this world of ethno-nationalism, this world where your humanity can be questioned and doubted and delegitimized because of your body, because of your gender, because of your gender identity, because of whom you are inclined to love, because of your religion, because of your socioeconomic status, because of your credit score, which definitely leaves me in the gutter. No matter what it is, we live in this world where all is not as it should be. And Ramadan comes year after year after year as a reminder that the world is not as it should be. And that we are not as we should be. And that our religion, as much as we love it, is not as it should be. And that we are still not yet at our goal. We are still in process. We are in the middle of the journey. And so we must spend a month thinking about what it means to regain a kind of spiritual and religious groove, to kind of recenter God in our lives, to dethrone all of those other things which have claimed the center, to reprioritize, to re-strategize, to rethink what we're doing here and why we're here. To be hungry, not for food, but for God. To be hungry for forgiveness. To be hungry for restoration. To be hungry for reconciliation with each other. To be hungry for justice. These are the real meanings of our hunger and our thirst. And so we began talking about rethinking religion now, not as something God has forced us to do, as a duty, as an obligation, but rather something that God is doing for us. And we remembered in that first gathering, Imam Ghazali talking about, okay, so God gave you the physical ability to pray. God gave you the desire to pray. God gave you the knowledge of how to pray. And I'm not worried about what form your prayer is taking or what madhab your prayer is following. But that God gave you the knowledge to pray, the desire to pray, the ability to pray, the gratitude in your heart that makes you want to rise for prayer. And so what is there left for you or for me to take credit for? Or for which to take credit? What is there left? And so the deeper we enter into even the mystery of prayer, we see that prayer is given to us as a medicine. Prayer is a gift to us, not our gift back to God, but it's a gift to us. And the act of prayer is simply the natural response to God's giving. No matter what form our prayer takes, prayer is the natural response to God's abundant love. And so I told you about my 80-something-year-old friend who would come through public transit with a walker in Chicago, even in the worst Chicago days in the winter, to pray at our little masjid at the American Islamic College where I used to serve. And she said, I have to be here because I don't know what else to do with my gratitude. I can't sit at home. I don't know what else to do with my gratitude. That's prayer. And we talked about how the prayer, every posture of the prayer, as Imam Ghazali says, whispers its secrets. We talked about how the prayer culminates in the fetal position, kind of re-entering the womb of Ar-Rahman, re-entering the love of God in the form of a baby, with the only exception is that the hands are not clenched, they're open. But we re-enter that womb-like state in prayer, and so we reconnect with our source. We reconnect with love. We reconnect with nourishment. We reconnect with God and with each other and ourselves. This is why Rumi says that we become magnified and glorified in prayer, is because our most restored moments in our day are the moments when we have reconnected with our source. And we cannot do that with pride. We cannot do that with fancy clothes. We cannot do that with degrees. We do that with the humility of getting on our hands and knees and putting our forehead on the ground. And so the gift of prayer then is a gift of healing. The gift of ablutions itself, even without the prayer, the ablutions are such a great gift. And Imam Ghazali says that, again, every part of this will whisper its secrets to you. Sometimes people say to me, yeah, I'm doing the prayer, but I'm not feeling anything. If it's coming from a teenager, I just say, how many other teenagers in the room feel this? Regardless, Catholics, Jews, whatever, everyone raises their hand, right? It's like, okay, well, welcome to the teenage years. So your sickness is called being a teenager. It happens. But the idea is that even as adults, we are so afraid to allow our prayers to be personal. Sometimes we're so afraid to listen to our prayer. But when we're going through the postures of prayer, we really should just allow the postures to whisper to us, as Imam Ghazali says. And we should allow ourselves to really feel our prayer and to allow it to be ours. Because your prayer in your heart of hearts, in that intimate place where only you and God are, that place is a place of secrets between you and God. And your prayer will be different from my prayer. They can both be legitimate and they can both be done in a valid and Sharia compliant way. But the fact is that what prayer means to you will be unique to you. This is about your personal relationship with Ar-Rahman. And we should never be afraid to have that personal relationship. That's what it means for prayer then to begin speaking. I allow the prayer to be mine. Because God gave it to me. God gave it to you too. God gave it to everyone. But this is something God is giving to me, and as I embody the prayer is doing its transformative work upon me. And yet if I'm just doing the duty or the obligation, and I'm not feeling it, and I'm not listening to it, then I become in this category that the Quran says, وَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ, woe to those people who say their prayers. And I've had people say, no, Brother Timothy, it's only the people who are neglecting to do the duty of prayer that there's a way. And actually, no, the Quran is just, woe to those people who are actually doing their prayers and yet are not heedful of what the prayers actually are saying, what the prayers are meaning. Who do all the pious things, they do all the dutiful acts, and yet they neglect to do these basic acts of benevolence, which are no-brainers when we're living in the state of prayer. If I'm like all saturated with God's love in my act of prayer, and I'm allowing that love to enter me and to permeate through me and to illumine me, how can I get up and ignore the hungry person? How can I get up and dismiss the orphan? How can I become immune or deaf to the needs of the cries of others and the needs of others? And so Imam Ghazali says that with regard to fasting, there are some people who fast and their reward is hunger and thirst. That's what they get. Because their fast has been just all about hunger and thirst. It has not been about transformation. It has not been about fasting from all of those things that are inside of me that are harming other people. All of those things that are getting in my own way. And it's not about fasting for God, fasting for something. It's not something that is being practiced in a transformative way. It's just because I have to be hungry. And I can be as nasty and as impatient and I can endanger pedestrians when I'm driving home at Maghrib time, and it doesn't matter. And we've all seen moments, and maybe we're humbled to have had experienced moments where in the midst of the fasting we were more impatient. We were harsher upon other people. I've seen imams kick people out of the masjid because they were too noisy or rambunctious or something, because they were fasting and the fasting was making them not softening their hearts but hardening. So Imam Ghazali calls that the fasting of the non-faster. Someone who is observing the hunger and thirst but is breaking the fast in every other way. And so if we're embracing this religion as something God is doing for us, then it becomes the gift. And every part of it is medicinal and healing and transforming. If only we had the eyes to see it and the hearts, the soft hearts to embrace it. And indeed, when we're in that kind of a state, when prayer is something God is doing through me, then I become part of this mind-blowing universal reality of God bearing witness that there is no God but God. I just become part of that. I become a conduit of God proclaiming that there is no God but God. I become part of that incredible process. When I'm invoking blessings upon God's messenger, alayhi salatu wasalam, I am joining God and the angels and the peoples of heaven in invoking blessings upon the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, and cultivating a love for the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, that is part of that larger love. Now, someone asked me after that first session, well, if the heart is compared to the Kaaba, and the Kaaba can only function properly when it's been cleansed of everything other than God. And if that's what our hearts have to do, meaning that we have to let go of all other loves and allow God to have God's place in the heart, to allow God and God's luminosity and God's love to exist solely, exclusively in the heart, then what about all these other loves? What about the people in our lives that we love? What about the beloved Prophet ﷺ that we love? What about the Quran that we love? Forget about the food. We'll get to that after. But I think that the reason is, it doesn't mean, or the answer is, and God knows best, but the answer is not that we stop loving anyone else, but that the love that we bear for everything and everyone else becomes purified. Because when God is inhabiting the heart, we begin to love as God loves, which is a non-possessive love. Which means I'm no longer loving you for what you can do for me. I'm loving you because that's just a fact. I'm loving without any expectation of you doing anything for me. You can be nasty to me. You can be kind to me. Doesn't matter, because the love that I bear for you is not about what goodies I'm going to get afterward. My little Musa at 10 years old is a master of this. I was really good at Kung Fu today. Or I was really good at swimming today. Can I watch? Can I play a game, a video game? Can I have a reward? I did really well on my test today, but can I have a reward? And it's natural for a 10-year-old to say that. Even sometimes he'll have a huge tantrum, and we'll have our adult counter tantrums, and then things begin to simmer down. He reads a few pages in a book, and he's like, so I'm all calm now, so can I have my privileges back? And many of us are like this religiously, even as adults. We're loving God because we want to get something back. And the operative word here that we use in the Muslim community is sawab. Oh, I'm going to get sawab, you're going to get sawab. It's as if we're playing some kind of frequent flyer program. God can reward whom God wills, but the path of love is not a path of rewards. It's not a path where we're seeking rewards. God can give rewards, but not because I've earned the reward, but because God is God. God loves. And as we learn to love as God loves, then our love for the Prophet ﷺ becomes purified. Our love for our family members become purified. Our love even of this dunya. I was walking with the sisters, we came in today, and we were talking about the love of the dunya. It is not wrong to love the dunya. It is not wrong to love this creation. The problem is that we love it wrongly. We don't love it as God loves it. We should love the creation, but not in the possessive, greedy way that we love it. Most of us, most of the time. To love the creation as God loves the creation is to have a desire to see it flourish, to have a desire to see it blossom and grow, whether I benefit from that blossom or not. And so the other loves do not have to be surgically removed from us, but they have to step aside so that God can inhabit the heart as God inhabits the house of God, the Kaaba. God inhabits the heart, illumines it with divine love, and that love then purifies all of our other loves. And so the other loves are not diminished, they're actually increased. And so we needn't fear that having God in our hearts is going to make us love people less or love the creation less. It's just a better love, a more life-giving love, a less greedy love, a less selfish love. And so this was an excellent question which came up that really challenged me to think more deeply about this. We then moved from the need to rethink religion, and we could go on all day, all week, all month on every aspect of the religion, the pilgrimage, the fasting, the ablution, the prayer, and look at the inner dimensions of Islamic practice and how incredibly medicinal and life-giving and beautiful all of this is when we stop thinking about it as a duty and start thinking about it as something that God is giving to us as a restorative mechanism, as a vehicle. You know, in Buddhism, they talk about the Dharma, the teaching, as a vehicle. It's there to get you from this place to that place. And it's instructive for us to think that the primary word that includes all of the prayer, all of these religious duties, the word that includes all of that is Sharia, which doesn't mean vehicle, doesn't mean wagon or car, but it means a way, a pathway which is meant to get us from here to somewhere else. And so the concept then of religion as Islam included, the concept of religion as a restorative mechanism, as a vehicle, as something which is designed to move us from this fallen, selfish, greedy, petty human being that I am today, and move me to a place of translucence in God, to move me to a place where I, imperfectly, but still, I am occupied with being a channel or conduit of God's beautiful qualities into the world, that plate of translucence. That religion is there to move me that way, and to move you that way, to move us together. And we need each other. The Ummah is part of the gift of this religion, because we are here to help each other on that path. It's too hard to walk alone. And so then we began to talk about our lives, our stories, our narratives as spiritual journeys. And in that discussion, we included both the wisdom of the 13th century Persian mystic Attar and the 15th century Spanish Catholic mystic, Teresa of Avila. Her book on the inner castle and Attar's poem, The Conference of the Birds, both walk us through a kind of pedagogy. Whether we're talking about the inner mansions of the soul, the journey to God in the heart of the soul, or the journey to God through these valleys that Attar speaks of, both provide a kind of landscape for the spiritual journey. And so we need to rethink our lives as spiritual journeys. And in that rethinking, we include these incredible and incredibly powerful stories of the prophets, alayhim as-salam ajma'in. May God's prayers and peace and blessings be upon all of them. And so it may be, we talked about the well of Joseph, it may be that you're in a place of darkness and despair and it's hard to see light. That places us in the company of Yusuf alayhi salam. We don't know how Joseph felt when he was cast into that well, but we can imagine ourselves with him in the well. We might be wrongly accused of something, and so now we're in prison with Joseph. It's one of the reasons why our sisters and brothers who live in parts of the world where innocent people are constantly being, even children are constantly being wrongly incarcerated and tortured. The story of Yusuf alayhi salam is a very powerful and healing story for them to recite when they're in these situations, because they understand that this unjust incarceration has placed them in the company of one of our beloveds. It may be that you are in the position of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam, in being exiled by your family and your loved ones, being misunderstood by the people that you would hope would love and understand you and affirm you and support you. You may be in the situation of Musa alayhi salam, who with a speech impediment is commanded to speak truth to power, even though he has no idea how he himself has the resources to do what God is asking him to do. You might be in the situation with Noah, building an ark when it's not even raining, doing some crazy project that doesn't make sense to anybody else. This rings very strongly with me. But building some kind of project that nobody else understands, and yet somehow you know that in your heart it's the right thing to do. But when we are in those places, these are places where we can now begin to map our own stories onto the stories of our beloveds, the prophets, the messengers, the friends of God, the saints, the great teachers of human history. And we can begin to remember their days in our days. And by doing that, we remember that our life is a spiritual journey, as opposed to what the advertising agencies are telling us, that our life is a spiritual journey. And it may be that we need the initiation of these difficult experiences in order to become beautiful and purified. We often, when bad things are happening to us, or when we are in one of these places, let's say in Joseph's well, we think, what have I done? Why is God punishing me? And the moment the question comes, well, was God punishing Joseph? We say, astaghfirullah, of course not. Right? But he was thrown in a well. That's a pretty bad place. Sold into slavery, got worse. Try to tell Joseph in the well, alayhi salam, that it's going to get worse. So this is not the story of God punishing a beloved, but this is God taking a beloved through that initiation that is necessary for the final exaltation. But when we are in those situations, instead of mapping our experience onto that of our beloveds, or mapping their experience onto ours, We think, oh, God is punishing me. Why is God doing this to me? When we pray with the Fatiha, we pray to be counted, to walk the path of those whom God blesses. These are the people we're talking about. We're asking to be included in their way, to be in their company. And do we really think we're going to get there without the well, without the prison, and without the stripping of honors? Or without days of profound discomfort? Days when we might even be pushed to the brink of ending our own lives, the way the Prophet himself, ﷺ, when the revelations first came, he didn't understand what was happening. It was profoundly disconcerting for him. Thank God for the wisdom and the maturity of Khadija, his beloved partner, who was able to help him see clearly what he could not at that moment see clearly himself. May God's blessings be upon her. Or it may be that in Mary's position, being a teenage Middle Eastern Jewish girl living in a very conservative society, being told that she was going to become pregnant outside of marriage. That's heavy. And she says, yes. In the Gospels, she says, let it be done to me as you say. Wow. Breathtaking. May God's blessings and peace be upon her. But when we find ourselves in those moments, these are the images that should come to us. And it takes some training. But we must begin to rethink our own lives as a spiritual journey. And when we think of our own lives as spiritual journeys, we stop judging these events, and we stop judging ourselves, and we stop judging each other in worldly terms. Because it may be that even though I feel you're doing something to me right now, it may be that you are just the innocent instrument God is using to purify and refine me, to challenge me to dig deeper and to become more and better. And so we talked about this in the second session. And in the third session, we continued that discussion of seeing our lives as spiritual journeys, but now not through the landscape of Attar, or through the landscape of Teresa of Avila, or through the landscapes of these prophetic narratives, but now through the landscape of the divine attributes, the beautiful divine qualities. And so it was asked to me then after that session, well, how do I know which quality to ask for? And the mystics of the past, the Sufis in our tradition, have said that one of the characteristics of a true seeker is that you become the child of your moment. It means you stop living somewhere else. You stop living some other time. You embrace the reality of this moment. And when we embrace the reality of this moment, we ask the question, where am I? And where I am spiritually is where the correct attribute will come to me. If I'm in a place of loneliness and isolation, what better place to discover God's quality of being always close and near? Am I going to discover that when I'm in a big rave or a big party or wedding feast? No. Or if I'm in the midst of all kinds of distractions, in these moments, the gift of being in a place of isolation, whether I went there of my own desire or not, doesn't matter. If I'm the child of my moment, I just wake up and I say, oh, well, where am I? Where are you, Timothy? I'm in this place of isolation and loneliness, and wow, it's not easy. I've got the well of Joseph to think of, but now I've also got the idea, well, if this life is a journey through the divine qualities, what quality is with me now? And I hear the Quran whispering to me that God is qareeb, God is close. And I begin to think that it took the deprivation, the taking away of all these other people and all these other activities away from me in order for me to discover the closeness of God. And then I can take the closeness of God back to the party. I can take the closeness of God back to the frenzy of my life. But this is one of the reasons why the desert is so important in the spiritual writings of all traditions. Because sometimes to discover God, we need to remove everything else. And sometimes that process doesn't happen by our choice. It happens because of events or decisions other people make, and we end up in that place, that desert, where we have nothing to hang on to. We have no one, we have nothing. We don't even have our Game Boy or our smartphone. We don't have anything. And it's in that place then, no matter how we got here, as Mr. T, remember Mr. T said, it doesn't matter how you got here. All that matters is where you're going. So in the end, we wake up, being the child of our moment, we wake up in the desert, and it doesn't matter in the end how we got there. It just matters that we awaken to the fact that we are in that place, and we are seeking the divine attribute, which is so beautifully and perfectly suited for that place. And being the child of my moment means that I'm aware of my moment as I'm journeying through my life. And in all of those moments, there's no moment where God is not. In the same way that there's no place where God is not. And in those moments then, I'm seeking the attributes, often as a counterpart to whatever I'm going through at that moment. So if I'm not feeling whole and I'm not feeling peaceful, then as-salam, God as the restorer of wholeness and peace, comes to my lips. And I ask God to fill that broken place within me. And so the spirituality of the attributes is not a kind of athletic spirituality where I'm becoming some kind of superhuman, super strong. It's not about my strength at all. It's about God's strength entering my weakness. It's about God's power entering my brokenness. So God comes to my inadequacy as pure adequacy. God comes to my brokenness as wholeness. God comes to my emptiness as fullness. And so then the attributes, then my life becomes a story of God being God. I never become anything, but I allow God to be God. And so my journey to the attributes doesn't require knowing Arabic. It doesn't require having all these fancy spiritual apparatuses, apparati, whatever, around me. It doesn't require membership in any kind of religious or spiritual club. All that it requires is my acknowledgement of the fact that I can't do this alone and that I am broken and empty and bankrupt, and God's richness and fullness is my only hope, and I open my heart, my broken heart, to allow that in. And then the spiritual alchemy of that becomes God's quality taking form within me. And then people say, oh wow, man, you are so peaceful, you're so this, you're... No. And then we have to clarify that, because it's not at all about the mess of my own inner state. It's about the fact that I acknowledge being the child of that moment. I acknowledge that brokenness and that mess, and I prayerfully ask God to come into that. So then this spiritual narrative, this spiritual story is not about what I achieve. It's about what God is achieving through me, sometimes in spite of me. And that's why all of these beloveds in religious history that we celebrate, they're all profoundly vulnerable people. Somebody today mentioned to one of my daughters that, oh, hey man, I saw your dad on YouTube speaking at Muhammad Ali's funeral. And she told the guy, yeah, he was my grandfather. And then I wrote back and I said, well, your spiritual grandfather maybe. You know, he was a good man, but not a perfect man. But he generated love. And that brother generated love. And that generation of love is evidence to me that God loved that brother in spite of the brokenness. And there's a wonderful contemporary lesson for us there. It's not about you being all together. Because it's not the boxer that we came to love as a global community. It was the broken man with Parkinson's who said that God gave me this disease as a gift, because I've been saying all along that I'm the greatest, but God is the greatest, and God had to show me that. And the rest of his life became not about knocking people down. It became an endless task of lifting people up. Lifting people up in every way that he could lift people up. And he did not differentiate. He loved everyone. And for that reason, when I've achieved, how many prayers I've racked up, whatever, it's all, or how many prayers I've missed, and I'm beating myself up about that. It's not about what I've done. It's about what God does. What God did and what God is doing now. And the moment God becomes the focus, then this idea of religion not being what I do for God, but what God is doing for me, and this idea of my own journey in life becomes a spiritual journey. And it's a story that's more about God than it's about me. And the further I go in my spiritual journey, the more it's about God and not about me. Because as we journey toward God, there is no place there for our egos to stand tall and proud. The journey to God is a journey of ego effacement, which means I have to become less and less and less important, because God is becoming increasingly central and increasingly important. And we don't really have time now to get into this deeply, but it brings us to the final point that I wanted to talk about today, which is we rethink religion, we rethink our own personal narratives as spiritual journeys and as journeys through God's divine, beautiful qualities. But then we have to radically rethink what and who we are as spiritual beings. And there are so many wrong ways I can think about myself in terms of my degrees, in terms of my ethnicity, in terms of my gender, in terms of my gender identity. I can get so fixed up on all of these things. And I forget that the human being was created to be a khalifa, a vicegerent, a representative of God on earth. And that means that we don't own anything. It means that we are here to take care of each other and take care of the creation on God's behalf, because all this belongs to God. And we are given these Quranic references like the human being was created in the most beautiful of all possible forms. We've been given the teaching of the fitrah. And again, there's a parallel here to the Buddhist concept of the Buddha nature. Everybody has Buddha nature inside them. It's just that they don't know it. But the fact is that we walk around with these secrets inside of us. But these secrets of God's presence, these secrets of God's qualities, these secrets of the mystery of the human form being so amazing that even the angels were commanded to bow down before it. That secret is a secret which we can only begin to discover when we are willing to become effaced, when we are willing to place God in the center and to remove the ego and to gradually work on diminishing the ego. And it's a stubborn thing, but to diminish that ego so that there's more space in the heart for God to be God. And our story then becomes less my story or your story, but God's story. And I become less and less this person and this collection of attributes, of my own attributes. The mystics talk about the exchanging of attributes. Means that I have to be willing to give up my little petty attributes for God's attributes, for God's qualities. And it doesn't mean that I will ever become God, but it does mean that my highest realization as a human being is actually becoming translucent, becoming less and less the person that I think I am, and more God's Khalifa, this translucent being that is here to channel these divine names into the world, to manifest God's qualities in the world, healing and love and justice and mercy, forgiveness in the world. And as I do that, then I become something else. Ironically, I become more me, but not in the sense I think of today. Because I become more the person that God has created me to be. And that person is the Timothy on the horizon that is constantly calling me in unison with the Quran, with God, and with the Prophet, constantly calling me to come home. And in this world, we think that the more stuff we get and the more recognition we get, the more fame, the more money we get, the happier we will be. But the spiritual truth is just the opposite. It's that the more I give up all of that stuff, and the more I give up these people who want to affirm me, but the more I give up all of that in order then to make my life about God and about serving and about channeling those divine qualities, that's the moment I begin to taste the Quranic promise of flourishing, the Quranic promise of bliss, of joy. And this is the moment where the teachings of the mystics becomes real to us, and that is that we were created for our own bliss. We were created to be happy. We were created to flourish. We were created to be radiant. But that radiance can only come in, with, and through the beloved, who is constantly calling us home and who has given us this religion as a vehicle, as a restorative mechanism to help facilitate our journey home. So I hope and pray that these final moments of the month of Ramadan are especially blessed for you and for all of your loved ones, near and far, in this world and the next. And I sincerely pray that God will illumine our hearts and illumine our eyes and illumine our deeds and illumine our intentions, so that we may see this Ramadan as the beginning of a lifelong process of transformation, a lifelong process of realizing that our story is really God's story, and that our hearts belong to God and only to God. May God bless you, may God keep you, may God guide you, and may God gather us all one day as radiant, restored beings in his beloved presence. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.